Before you'll be able to score Schoolnet assessment bubble sheets using your school's Toshiba eStudio, you'll need to do two things. First, install both Schoolnet's ScanIt application and the Toshiba eStudio remote scanning drivers on your laptop. Happily, our technology department has made this process incredibly easy for you. Second, on the laptop, you'll need to configure the ScanIt software for your school's eStudios. This video only deals with this second step. If you haven't installed the school's ScanIt software and the eStudio drivers, you can use the link above to open the video which covers this first step, installing ScanIt and the eStudio drivers. Part 2. Configuring the software. There are 4 important points to remember during this process. First is that the teacher or staff member must be logged into PowerSchool and then they launch Schoolnet. If you have multiple eStudios, configure them all at once. A later configuration always wipes out prior configurations. The eStudio must be powered up and networked, and you must know the IP address of each eStudio. Step 1. Log into PowerSchool. Note the only difference in the web address is the last part being either teachers or admin. Note also that the admin logins gang both the username and the password, but separate the two by a semicolon. Step 2. From the PowerSchool homepage, launch Schoolnet from the navigation bar. On the Schoolnet homepage, click the ScanIt button to start ScanIt in a pop-up window. Important: if your web browser warns you about this pop-up attempt, you should allow it and have it remember this choice for future launches of ScanIt. And note also that ScanIt can only be launched from within Schoolnet. Before the Scan button can be used, you must first configure ScanIt for your eStudios. Click on the Configure Scanner button. This will cause the Select Source dialog box to open, and you should see an entry for eStudio Remote Scan Driver. Select this driver by clicking on it and then clicking on the Select button. Note that you may also have other scanning devices installed on your computer, which will show up here. Schoolnet's ScanIt software will only work with eStudios. Step 4. Once you select the eStudio driver, the Local Discovery dialog box opens. It's here that you define each of the eStudios that can be used by ScanIt. Note, you will never use the Start Discovery button or the Advance buttons. To start the process of adding an eStudio, click on the button Manual Selection. Step 5. Clicking on the Manual Selection button causes this dialog box to open. We'll need to provide only 3 fields with data. First, the IPv4 address of your eStudio in the form of number.number.number.number. This is the way that network addresses are notated. Second, you'll need to provide a name for this particular eStudio. It should be descriptive of which of the eStudios you may have in your schools. Third, the location of the eStudio. Note that both of these last 2 fields are free format in that you can type whatever you'd like in them. Step 6. As an example, we're going to use the IP address of 10.4.64.126. To enter this address, first select the first or leftmost octet. Using your keyboard, enter the digits 1, 0, followed by touching the period key. Touching the period key will skip you to the next octet automatically, selecting it for you, so all you now need to do is to type the entries for the remaining octets of 4 for the second octet, 6, 4 for the third octet, and finally 1, 2, 6 for the fourth octet. And since in this example we gave the name field the name of the printer that we also print with, and we combined it with the model number of the eStudio to make it identifiable. For the location field, we specified which building, floor, and department. To accept this entry, simply click on the OK button. Note that the printer now appears in the list of the dialog box. If you had additional eStudios to define, you'd once again use the Manual Selection button and repeat the process. Here's an example of a multiple configuration that's being shown with more than one eStudio. Notice each row shows the name, IP address, and the location of the printer, thus making it easy for you to select the nearest eStudio for your needs. Step 7. Now that our eStudio has been defined, it's time to select that printer and set the scanning properties. Note that the OK button at the bottom of this dialog box is gray. We first have to select a printer by clicking on the name of the printer. This done, the OK button is live, and now we click on it. Step 8, our final step. This brings us to the eStudio Remote Scan Driver settings. These settings must exactly match the ones displayed. Original size, it should be equal to letter LT. Single-sided. The rotation angle should be 0 because we're not rotating. The color mode must be black. The original mode must be text, and the resolution must be 600 dpi. You'll also note that the IP address for the chosen eStudio appears at the bottom left of the dialog box. The last step is to click on the Scan button. This will establish a connection to the eStudio and cause the scanner bar to make a pass. If someone's actively using the eStudio, you may receive a request to wait a few seconds before clicking on the Scan button again. And note, it is not necessary for this part of the setup to have any paper in the eStudio. You're now ready to scan test bubble sheets with the chosen eStudio. If you'd like to choose a different eStudio, once again, click on the Configure Scanner button. The difference for the first time this button was ever used, and now, is that at least one eStudio is configured. You will instead get the Remote Scan Driver dialog box opening. From here, you'd use the menu Devices and the command Select eStudio. Warning: if you use the Discovery command instead, it will delete all of your previous eStudio manual definitions, and you'll have to enter them all again. It's for this reason that you should set up all of your eStudios in the beginning. And one last pointer: when a teacher's ready to scan their test sheets, they simply click on the Scan button. If there's no paper in the eStudio to scan, they'll get the following message. Note that it misleads the user to think that there's something wrong with the configuration when there really isn't. Simply place the pages in the eStudio again and then hit the Scan button.